Welcome to This Week in Our Collective Heads. I'm Patrick.
I'm Kevin.
One of the things we wanted to start as a kind of reoccurring series is going to be called A Moment in Time.
Mm-hmm. And this particular moment is going to be a moment in kind of our timeline. So this is about origin stories, if you will, of some of our favorite series, like the Final Fantasies.
Yep, which is what we're going to talk about today. Mm-hmm. Our first time in the series of Final Fantasy. Because I didn't have a Super Nintendo, Kevin will start us off.
Yes. Okay, so Final Fantasy III at that time came out in the US in 1994 on my birthday, October 18th, which I didn't know at the time, but this has remained my favorite video game of all time since then. And it's also interesting because it kind of shaped how I play games. I was still very much into the Game Genie because I was like, hey, I want to play all the games, and Game Genie was an easier way to beat them. And so my first run of Final Fantasy III, I started at level 99, 999 magic points, 9,999 HP. And so I went through, and it might have been actually better for me because it was my first RPG, and so I wasn't bogged down with all the mechanics. It was just, I can annihilate everything. Check this out. And so I fell in love with that stuff later. Yeah. The first thing that I fell in love with was the story and the characters. This is the Final Fantasy that has the most, with a 14 character playable roster and 3 characters you can control temporarily. Biggs, Wedge, and General Leo. And so those characters remain something that are very special to me. Mm-hmm. And Final Fantasy III on the Super Nintendo has an opera.
Yes.
Which I did not expect that. And that was something that I had never seen before. And it showed me so many things that I had never encountered before. So the first time I went through it with a Game Genie and with a walkthrough. Okay. And so I found everything, found all the stuff. And after I finished it, I kind of sat down and watched the 24-minute ending, which, just the whole thing is majestic. And because it's still two-dimensional, it didn't really deal with, it still looks good today. It is kind of the pinnacle of sprite-based art, and I really enjoy it. The music is amazing. The soundtrack to Final Fantasy VI is absolutely incredible, and there have been remixes, there have been orchestral versions, and just everything about this game kind of came together and created. It was the perfect storm of a lot of things. 1994 was also. And we'll get to this later on this moment in time. 1994 was an amazing year. Final Fantasy III came out in the US, as did Chrono Trigger in Japan. And those two are two of the best games on that system and of all time. And it showed me that games could be something that I had never seen before. I had never connected to characters on that level. And Final Fantasy III was the first game that made me cry. Because of the death just before the midpoint. Yep. And then, okay. Came out in 1994. If you haven't played it, I encourage you to play it. But, minor spoiler here. Midway through the game, the world is destroyed. Yeah. And then you keep playing. And by that time, I'd already put, 20, 30 hours into a game. And even going through with a Game Genie and walkthrough and just mowing down everything. The world is destroyed. The bad guy wins. And then I try to rebuild. And that was just amazing. Yeah. And the first time I came upon the final boss, I died. I had ridiculously powerful characters. I had all the magic spells. Yep. I had all of the things that I needed, and I still died. Yeah. And then this past year, for the 25th anniversary of Final Fantasy III, 6, as I now call it, I played through it again. Mm-hmm. And instead of being level 99, I was level 29. and I beat it. And at the end, yes, and I beat it. And they just did a lot of things to make the game, no matter where you were at, the game was always challenging.
Yeah.
And I don't play with Game Genie anymore. I don't use walkthroughs unless I absolutely have to.
Yeah.
And so this for me is a formative game.
Yeah.
And if you'll notice, it's also signed by Colin Moriarty, which is awesome. And yeah.
Really is.
And there's just a couple of series like this that are just iconic, and not only for me, but for a lot of people for whom this was their first RPG.
Yeah.
And kind of the first RPG that really gets its hooks into you.
Yeah.
Is a very special thing.
No, it is. It is. Actually, Final Fantasy VII was my first RPG that I did more than just a character creation and run around. I used to play Bard's Tale on PC. It was my brother's PC, and I would play it, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I wanted to be a sorcerer, but I didn't know what the difference between a sorcerer and a wizard and all that was. So Final Fantasy VII came out in 97, and the year leading up to it, I was really wanting an N64 and wanting Super Mario 64, but there were a couple other games that pulled me towards getting a PlayStation, thinking, okay, well, I'll get a Nintendo 64 later. When Final Fantasy VII came out in 97, it was a perfect storm for me because I wanted to get into RPGs. I liked the idea, and I had just seen Blade Runner for the first time. And the futuristic, it was probably the year prior, but the futuristic feel of Blade Runner and this gritty atmosphere was just perfect. Right after that, I started playing on my brother's Sega CD. I started playing Rise of the Dragon, which is very much like basically a Blade Runner point-and-click adventure. And I was horrible at it, but the atmosphere was just so cool. That's a very adult game for a kid to be playing, but I loved it. And then I saw the cinematic for Final Fantasy VII, the trailer, which was the opening cinematic for it. And I'd been playing Sega CD, which is a lot of full motion video games, but you're just sitting there watching it. And I could immediately tell this is not a pre-rendered video that you're going to sit and watch. This is what the game more or less is going to look like. There's a difference in the engine versus cinematic versus in game, but this hooked me, and thankfully I had a PlayStation, and I spent the entire summer of, I guess it would have been 98, playing this game. The entire summer, and didn't beat it until that December because I was busy breeding chocobos and racing chocobos, spending pretty much the entire time at the Golden Saucer, Golden Saucer, betting on races and winning money. But this is the first game that made me cry as well. So spoilers again.
If you don't know this, you haven't been on the internet.
Yeah. Aerith dies. If you're in Japan, it's Aerith. Aerith dies about midway through the game. And when that happened, this is the first time that I cried in a video game, and I really lost it. For that was I was shipping Cloud and Aerith. A lot of people were shipping Cloud and Tifa. I was shipping Cloud and Aerith totally, and that didn't happen. Did not happen at all. But the cast of characters, like you said, there aren't as many. I think there are, I'll double check that, 10 or 12 playable characters in the game. There's 2 optional characters you can get. Yuffie and Vincent. And Vincent, just the whole feel of every single place that you went in this world. As soon as you were able to open up and adventure around, every town is its own culture. You could sit and listen to the music in the specific town, and just the music alone gave you a feel of what that town was Casa de Sol, this kind of island town, which it sounds like, I'm pretty sure it's Beck. A lot of it is taken from Final Fantasy VI. There are a lot of songs that are thematically pulled from that, but a lot of it is original, and the digital music in that, the jump from there. Final Fantasy 6 is
MIDI
the
based.
tops. It's MIDI based, and it's as far as you could go. That and like Earthbound, like as far as you can go when it comes to a cartridge game. To this day, it's the first one that made me cry, and it's the first game that it's the first game that I beat by myself, which sounds weird, but there are a lot of games I didn't beat Super Mario. I played a lot of Mario. I beat. No, take that back. Silver Surfer. I beat Silver Surfer. There are other games that I beat, but it's the first one that I remember it just being this catharsis and really experiencing a story that I didn't think you could do stories like that. The other game that was like that is right here, actually, Metal Gear Solid. But I just absolutely loved it, and to this day, I've replayed it. I've beaten it 4 times. I've replayed it countless times. So. It's just beautiful stuff.
Yeah, I tried 7. I want to say at least 4 times, and I've beaten the first disc.
Yeah,
but I can't go past it because like there was one time when the second disc was lost.
Yeah,
we had disc 133.
Yeah,
and so like that's one of those. It's on my list of. Someday I really want to, and maybe with the remake that will make all the hardcore fans really upset. I might play the new one. I might, because I don't know. I think that maybe the remake will give me a chance to explore that story.
Yeah,
because I really do like the characters, and I want to see how there's some weird stuff.
Yes,
toward the end of that story.
There's some weird stuff, and there's some interesting. The themes involved are a lot deeper than a lot of games involving death, where we go after death, which has to do with the director's life. He'd had a death recent in his family, similar to what happened with Earthbound, with the director for Earthbound. So a lot of the themes involving death, what happens to us when we die, and it's almost this religious but not quite religious kind of theme to it in an extent, and with the futuristic but not futuristic fantasy land, which is really cool, and not steampunk but kind of it's really beautiful stuff.
Yeah. Going back to 6, steampunk was a thing.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting how they melded the mechanical and the magical.
Yes.
And that was something, because all of them up until then are, classical, high fantasy, whatever.
Yes.
And 6, they deviated from that, and they went, hey, okay, so that's cool, but what if we added lasers and giant mechs? I mean, what could we do there?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a thing that's really special to a lot of us.
Which I think was what they were going to do with 7. If you don't know the story behind this, and we'll link right here, I'll link it. Was 7 was originally going to be a very different game. It was going to come out on the N64 or the Super Nintendo, and due to Chrono Trigger or Chrono Cross, the development team of that being used for at the time, they had to delay Final Fantasy VII. So a lot of the themes were then pulled into that series, but the plot of Final Fantasy VII was going to be you were a detective in New York.
Really?
Yes. And
this I did not know.
Yeah, and you were going to be essentially solving crimes, but it was New York, but it also had some fantasy stuff. So they were going further into futuristic.
That actually sounds like Parasite Eve.
Yes, Parasite Eve.
Is that
and
where
if you look up, yes, Parasite Eve, yeah.
Whoa!
Yes. So a lot of these themes were just pulled into other games.
That is very cool.
Yeah, so a lot of the games, Parasite Eve is one of the others that got similar to Jodorowsky. The director was going to be doing Dune, switching to movies. Sorry, Dune was going to be made before it was made by David Lynch. It was going to be made by a director who was famous for his art films and these really weird, dark visuals. And there's a link right here. There's a trailer to a documentary about what his version of this movie was going to be. And similar to Final Fantasy VII, his work never got made, but they took the ideas and made tons of other movies with them, and the themes and the visuals were pulled from that. So it feels kind of weird, but at the same time, it's kind of nice that those themes still got to be used. Like I said, Parasite Eve, which is a fantastic game. We need more Parasite Eve.
Yeah, we do.
But yeah, there's. Let us know down here what some of your favorite themes or stories are when it comes to Final Fantasy. What was Final Fantasy 6? 3, your first one, Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8 or 9. I met someone whose first was 10.
That's an awkward jumping in place.
It really is. It really is. But let us know.
Or even if it goes back to the originals, because I've actually gone back and played some of the Nintendo ones, and it's fun to go back and see some of the themes that later became iconic and part of the series. And
some of the mechanics that weren't there at the beginning, like setting an attack, and if that enemy dies or runs away, your attack is ineffective.
Yep.
It doesn't go to the next enemy.
Yeah.
That's frustrating. So yeah, let us know what some of your memories are of this.
Okay.
And we'd also segue into...
We're also doing reader mail.
Yes.
And this is a segment that we're going to keep doing, so send us your mail.
We will answer your questions accurately or inaccurately, but we will answer them.
We will answer you with what is in our collective heads, as is the theme. So our first one comes from Alec Wooten. He says, can you guys explain why SNES games are skyrocketing, whereas old Sega games and systems are cheap?
Yep.
Why are some games so expensive, such as Chrono Trigger, Evo, Earthbound, etc.? Because it makes collecting harder for the family man. And it really does.
That it does.
A big part of it is just simply supply and demand. There's a lot more nostalgia for Super Nintendo and the collection of people, because like the Super Nintendos, they last, but a lot of them, they get sold by a mom, or they get stuffed in a garage and get wet somewhere, and so there is a finite supply of the carts. They've made new retro systems and everything, so there's systems to play the games, but if the cart goes bad, there's not really anything you can do about that.
There are companies that do reproduction carts, and I'll link right there. If you want a reproduction cart of a game, people are making reproduction carts. They're not the price that you'd want to pay for it. But if it's something you really want to pull, like Link to the Past, or something that's more expensive, you get a reproduction cart. But they don't come with the box. And that's the other reason that Nintendo and Super Nintendo games are more expensive than Genesis games, because Genesis came with a plastic like clamshell box, which Nintendo to that time had been doing kind of flimsy light cardboard boxes. Most kids just threw those away. So if you find a game with the box for Nintendo, that's a big deal. For Genesis, it usually has the box, because you wouldn't want to throw away this big piece of plastic.
Right, and it was much more like it, because it has the little slots where the game actually goes. Whereas the Super Nintendo had the box, and then that stuff that you're gonna throw away, and then you slide it in, and then it rattles, and it's just not as aesthetically pleasing, and that's why it's harder to find those. I would recommend Amazon, because eBay tends to be pricier. I'm not 100% why. But if you go on Amazon, a lot of times you can find, they'll have like the regular price, and then there'll be offers from whatever. And because it's not a timed thing, I mean, there's an element of, catching it at the right time.
Sure.
But Amazon tends to be a little bit easier to find stuff, especially if you're just looking for the cart. Then
if you're looking for something very specific and it's just the cart, Amazon, and you don't get in bidding wars. Because I've been in those in eBay, and it gets ridiculous. It gets to the last second. So if you're...
And you end up spending way more than you had anticipated. You budget this, and you're like, well, yeah, but $5 more. What's $5 more? And then, what's $5 more? And so on, and it just stacks, and it can get bad. So try Amazon and reach out to your locals. A lot of Facebook groups also have, the, like, where I live is it's the Colony garage sale something. And a lot of times you can find, like, boxes. A buddy of mine picked up a Super Nintendo, and I think he got 39 games for $60. because somebody was just getting rid of a box. And like some of those carts were actually pretty rare. And I looked it up, and the value of selling those items on eBay came out to like $340.
And some
so
people
look for bulk purchases.
Yeah.
And then you can have those to trade amongst your friends.
And I'll actually be doing this soon because I really, 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 really want some of these retro systems that I haven't been able to play in a long time, and ROMs just don't do it. Or I should say, playing on a PC, it doesn't have the same feel. It's glitchy and it's not as accessible. Flea markets, if you're just looking for games in general, flea markets. There are a lot of people there there's some people there who will price gouge you, but a lot of people there are like, you know what, I've got all this stuff, I just need to sell it. It's not as good as a garage sale, because a garage sale is literally just get it out of here. But you can find some decent things there. Like a friend of mine, Ben, found a ton of carts for crazy cheap, and I don't advocate like trying to con people, but you can find people who don't know exactly what they have, and you might feel bad about doing this, but they might sell you, for instance, I think he got Earthbound for like $5 or $10. He got Mario 64 for the same price. The person was just like, everything in the box is this price, just whatever you want. So he scoured that. And I'll link his video down here. I'll be social today. But finding all of these games, if you want something specific, Amazon's totally for you. If you're looking for systems or games in general, you can luck out and find a lot on there. There are the reproduction consoles, but it's all your preference. I personally would like to play it on an original, but the Genesis ones, you touched upon it earlier. The intellectual properties on Nintendo are still crazy strong.
That's true.
I didn't have a Super Nintendo. I had a Genesis, but still, all the intellectual properties from Nintendo, I remember the strong games that I played on the Genesis were not actually Sega intellectual properties. They weren't specific to that.
They were Midway or whoever.
Midway, so Mortal Kombat, Echo the Dolphin. There were some amazing games in there. Aladdin for Genesis, which I think there's still a debate which one's better, the Super Nintendo or the Genesis. I think the Genesis version is better because they actually sent it out to two different companies. We might talk about that.
You can tell.
But at the time, they actually sent that game out to two different companies to make, because I believe it's Capcom with Nintendo had the rights. I'll do some double checking on that. But two different companies made that game, made licensed games. It wasn't one company that then ported it. You got two separate games for this. But there were some phenomenal games that came out on Genesis that were great, but didn't have that. They don't have as much nostalgia as the Super Nintendo. So people still pull over to play Metroid games or Link to the Past or Mario World or Super Mario RPG. There are a lot of great games that are on Super Nintendo that there are. I would say there are just as many good games on Genesis, but those series have just died out, and the Genesis ones, I guess I'm not surprised with the plastic cases. I really think it's the plastic cases a big part of this, because those things, everyone kept them. No one kept the paper cases for Super Nintendo games or Nintendo.
Well, there's also the fact that the plastic ones are going to be more durable by default.
Yeah.
And like if the cardboard covering of a SNES game gets wet, and then it's gone.
And then you throw it out. Yeah. You throw it out.
And the plastic one will stay for however long.
Yeah.
One other element to this, because your original question is, why are these more expensive than the others? And I think we're coming back to that eventually. It started with advice. But one of the other things is, because Nintendo remains big in mindshare, there are more sites. Like IGN right now is doing the history of awesome year by year.
Yeah.
Because it's more likely that somebody will say, hey, do you remember this game? Because there were more Super Nintendos by the end. And so because those were a bigger thing, it's more likely that somebody will say, hey, do you remember this? And then that segues into, and that's what increases the demand slightly higher, even though they both came out at the same time.
They didn't. That's
No,
top.
the
the games. Oh, I thought you meant the Super Nintendo and the Genesis.
No.
I was going to say, because the Genesis came out 2 years prior to the Super Nintendo, and while it's technically the same generation as the Super Nintendo, it was really, they were trying to compete with the Nintendo, with the NES.
Yeah.
And then when the Super Nintendo came out, they went, oh no, we can't.
Oh, bloody hell.
Sega no longer does what Nintendo don't, because Nintendo now was able to do what...
But blast processing.
But blast processing. Well, that's when they came out with the 32X that looked like a big mushroom that put in there. And then the Sega CD, which I mentioned earlier in the episode, which you took your Sega Genesis and you docked it into the Sega CD, and the Sega CD was almost double the size, double the width of the Sega Genesis. But if you had all those together, if you wanted to spend a lot of money, if you had all those together,
Megatron.
It did. Actually, there were games that you could play if you had the CD soundtrack, because the Sega CD played at CDs, so you could put the CD soundtrack in the CD and play the game, and it would play the music off of the CD, which was so cool. But you had to spend, so you had to buy a Genesis. Then you had to buy a 32X, and 32X was, I want to say it was like $150, and then you had to buy a Sega CD, which I think was $250. You had to already have a Genesis, so if you didn't have all of those, you're spending $1,000 on a system. Meanwhile, Super Nintendo is just blasting through
Not blasting.
Not blasting, because that was trademarked. Powering through. I loved my Genesis. I'm going to be playing some Super Nintendo because I'm going to be getting all those. But it all depends on also if you're hunting a specific game or if you want to go out and just find stuff. Local game shops are really cool. There's CGX around here, and there's some other smaller. Look for the smaller shops. Look for the mom and pop shops. There are some that will try to gouge you. There are some websites out there that will try to gouge you for a game because they say, "Oh, well, that's the normal price," or this is a competitive price. While these are finite, there's not a set price on something, so you'll find people will pay ridiculous amounts for Earthbound or Link to the Past, the games that are just huge names. Meanwhile, you can get them at a local shop for a reasonable price. It's still going to be expensive.
And one last piece of advice on this one is there will be times when you're going to encounter something and you're like, oh my goodness, I must have it now. Research.
Yeah.
Because the odds that this is the only chance you'll get to have that game are very slim.
Yeah.
There are enough still out there, and the Super Nintendo carts are really durable. They still run. This sucker still runs.
Yeah. Carts just do that. That's just what I love about cartridge-based games.
Yes, it's going to be expensive.
Yes.
But take your time, do your research, find the price that you're willing to pay, and stick to that.
Yeah.
Unless it's like $3, because you're not going to find it for $3.
Just grab it.
But just find a way to budget it correctly, and good luck.
Yeah. Good luck. And one side thing that I'd say on that, I keep adding side things, but this is important. Most of us have smartphones now. Pull out your smartphone and just Google the price. Just look on Amazon. Amazon's a good rule of thumb on that. Then you can see, okay, is this about comparable to what I'd pay on Amazon? Is this very cheap? Is this person price gouging? And I actually do this to this day. I do this if you go to Best Buy or other stores will price match Amazon. If you're there, and you're already wanting it and it's the right price. But it's even better for these because you don't know how much these are going to go. Blu-rays or games these days, okay, they're about this price. But these, you don't know. This, you don't know. And if you're actually wanting to collect these with the boxes, look for the prices. If you care about just the cart, okay. But if you want the box, look online and double check, because they may be price gouging. They may not be. But good luck and enjoy the hunt. We'll see you guys later.
Have a good week.